I'm seeing it. Is everybody else seeing it?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, we're good. So as Dan mentioned, organization of school information. I'm Barb Miller. I'm the Consortial Services Supervisor at Rails. Prior to that, I worked in school libraries for 27 years. Some of them as a parapro or ESP, depending on what it's called in your district. And then I went and got my master's and my teaching license and spent the rest of it as a school librarian. I've worked at the building level and the district level. And then I spent 4 years in an academic library in a local community college. And I've worked then with pre-K all the way through post-secondary. I have my contact information here. I know that Dan said he would be sharing the slides. My philosophy anytime I present anywhere and I give you contact information is I don't care if it's March or if it's this time next year and you have a question about something I talked about, go ahead and email me. I do not mind at all. We can set up a Zoom meeting. I can give you my phone number, whatever we need. If you feel you have a question that I can answer, I'm happy to do so at any point in the future. So when you are putting together MARC records to go into your catalog, my philosophy is more is better. I had a colleague that felt that just putting the title and the author was more than adequate. And I asked them, well, if a kid is just randomly looking up books on rabbits and rabbit does not appear in the title, how are they going to find that book? And it was like, oh, light bulb moment that we all have. So all that information that you put in the MARC record is what shows up in the OPAC. So if they can't find it, they're not going to read it. So the more information you can put into that record, the more likely it is that your students will find what you have in your collection. Here is a basic MARC record for anybody who is new and might not be familiar with what I'm talking about, or you're like, aha, now I know what it is, but this is just an overview of a general MARC record. We have all of the fields here and they have what's called tags, and they all correspond to different pieces of information that'll show up in your catalog. So it stands for machine readable cataloging. The basic fields that most library catalogers consider the essentials, like this is what makes up a very basic one, is you need to have the ISBN. That's a little barcode on the back of the book that the publisher puts there. A lot of times when you're cataloging in your own online system in your building, you'll scan that and it'll pull up records that you can match to. So you want to always include that if you're doing it manually, you're not doing it, scanning. You want the author's name, the title of the book, publication information. That's where it's published, who published it, and the copyright date or date of publication, depending on how it's listed. Physical description, which is just how many pages does it have? Does it have illustrations? Are the illustrations black and white, color? And size, which is simply measuring the spine in centimeters and rounding up to the largest number if it's between. If you have one of those picture books, for those of you who work in primary and elementary, that's a big rectangle, then you're actually going to give them the height and length in your physical description as your dimension. Series title, if it's part of a series, it's really helpful to put that in here, so it shows up in your OPAC. So if you, a teacher or a student, is just looking for, I want all the books in this series, and they just type the series name in, everything will be populated. I've had to go back and retro do that, and it's a pain in the backside. So if you can do it up front, you should definitely do it. Summary. I think it's really helpful to give the kids some idea what a book is about. You can usually copy those from Amazon and just give credit to Amazon in the field there, or if you're importing a record, it should be in there. And then you have your subject headings. And that's what I alluded to before when I said if you're looking for a book about rabbits and it's not in the title, it would be in the subject heading. So that tells us more about what the book is about. Whoops, and it went too far for me. So if you are trying to put this into your system and you scan that ISBN on the back of the book and nothing comes up. Now, if you don't have cataloging experience or you've never done this before, that's like, okay, now what do? I have this book and I have no record. And then you default to I'll put in the author and the title, which is great. But there are some places where you can get records. Now, you will not be able to upload them in their entirety as you would if you were scanning the ISBN on the back of the book. There are some workarounds to that, but I would have to know everybody's software and have to play with it, and we don't have that kind of time. So my suggestion is you can just copy and paste line by line for the fields that you need. So one place that I always go to first is WorldCat, which is part of OCLC, which is one of the world's largest repositories of MARC records. So you can always find stuff there. You can go to the Library of Congress. It's another good place to find things. This is where I'm going to give a plug because I actually handle the Find More Illinois program for Rails, but we have, I think, 2.5 million books in our system right now. So if you go to the Rails page and then to the Find More Illinois page, or just directly, that's the link to our catalog, you can do the same thing there. You can see if the book you want is there. And we do have school libraries in our cataloging system, so you will find kids' books there. And also, Illinois Heartland's library system has their share system, and it's a very similar union catalog where lots of libraries participate, schools included, and you will find records there. So 3 good places where I know you'll find quality records that you can import into your system. We also, or I should say, I have always used the free webinars and courses at webjunction.org. And something that aligns to what I'm talking about today is the introduction to cataloging for non-catalogers. And these are all self-directed. You can pause them and go back at where you left off. Some of them will give you a certificate. So if you need to demonstrate, as somebody said on an e-learning day, that you were in fact doing something towards your job, it's not just cataloging. They have lots of training related to libraries, interesting articles, all kinds of things. So I highly recommend checking out this site. All right, before somebody else, let's talk a little bit about genreification. So to genreify or not, there's pros and cons to doing it, and it's really up to you and what your goals are and what you think would best suit your students. If you genreify, you're taking your fiction collection, and instead of putting it in alpha order by the author's last name, you're doing author's last name, alpha order author's last name, but by genre. So you will have a fantasy section or a mystery section, ghost stories, if you call it horror, spooky stories, there's lots of names for it. Just, you get the idea. Everything is broken apart that way. Something that's really great about it is it makes it really easy for kids to find their favorite genre. So if they know that they really want to read all your fantasy books, they can just go to the fantasy section. It's really easy. When teachers want kids to read specific genres, again, you can just send them to that section. They're all in one place. A drawback is sometimes you will have kids that just get stuck in a genre, and they're not going to go anywhere else in the library because all their favorite books are right on these 6 shelves, and that's exactly where they go every time. And so you sometimes have the challenge of getting them to read something else. Another challenge is there are books that fall under more than one genre. My solution to that, maybe not the best one, but it worked for me, is I would go to Follett's tidal wave page, and whichever genre was listed first, that's where my book went. I figured they did all that cataloging, they may have some idea. Another thing to consider is that sometimes it'll separate an author's body of work. A lot of authors work within, they only write within one genre, but you have some that go across. So it really depends on how you do things. If you're doing a lot of author studies and you've genreified, you just need to keep that in mind if an author's work is in multiple locations in your library. To not genreify is when you just keep the fiction shelved by the author's last name. It can make locating a favorite genre challenging for kids because unless you have spine labels, somewhere on there to indicate what the genre is, they're going to have to go look it up, and then you have a crowd at your OPAC trying to figure out, what's what so they can go find it. Good thing is, though, it will expose kids to titles they might not find on their own, because when they're shelf browsing, they're seeing lots of different things that way versus when they're just within one genre. It will keep multiple genre books aren't an issue when you're cataloging them, and it'll also keep an author's body of work all in one place. Okay, here is the tough one. There are a lot of people who are considering genreifying their nonfiction. It's also known as ditching Dewey. I worked in one district that had done that. And there were pros and cons. Again, like everything. Was it my favorite? No. And we'll hit some of those reasons why it bothered me more than it may bother you. I would suggest if you are considering this, go to mightylittlelibrarian.com. It's a school librarian in Louisiana. I spoke to her on the phone several times. She is very gracious about sharing her knowledge. She genrefied her nonfiction, and she has it very well organized and structured. And I would strongly suggest if you're going to do it, follow her plan. Because here are some things to consider. Genrefying your nonfiction is going to be way more time consuming than genrefying fiction, because you're going to have to kind of handle every book and figure out in the categories you've created where that book fits. You are also going to come across books that will defy the plan that you've set up. So you have to determine what you're going to do when you run into that. You know, things are going to have to, unfortunately, probably be shoehorned into areas that are adjacent and not necessarily a perfect fit. If you keep creating new sections to put these books in that don't fit easily, you're going to run into situations of where Dewey is 10 sections. I walked into a library one time that had 38 sections. Now, explain to me how that makes more sense than the original 10. You can't just keep adding sections, because it becomes a never-ending thing and you're never going to find anything. Consistency. That's why I said check out Mighty Little Librarian. You need to have a plan at the beginning. This is not something that you kind of devise it as you go along. You need to be very thoughtful as to what's going to go where and how many categories there are going to be. So if you've done that, that's half the battle. This is the reason why I really, really didn't like it when I worked in a district that had this. You probably will not be able to use any of the collection analysis tools that many of the publishers and vendors offer. Follett being the biggest one that most of you probably use. The reason is it looks for what's called the 82 tag in the MARC record, which is your Dewey Decimal number or fiction call number. You won't have that if you've genrefied. In some cases, you can direct Follett to look for the 92 tag, which is a local call number that you've created. But there is software out there that doesn't enable you to assign something a 92 or a local call number. So you're going to have a large portion of your books that they just won't count. So you will never have an accurate collection analysis if you do this. And as I mentioned before, you have the ever expanding category issue. You really don't want to go there, because it becomes a rabbit hole and you're just never going to get out. And you just keep making more and more categories with, like 6 books here and 8 books here. And it just kind of defeats the purpose of simplifying things. Generally, you will have to process your own books, because I don't know, I should take it back. I do know one vendor who will custom do it for you, but you will have to talk to them and see if they're willing to take on another district that does this, and that's Children's Publishing, Inc. They will customize, but no one else will. So you're not going to be able to order anything pre-processed. You're going to have to do it all yourself, because it has to fit your very specific system you set up. Something you really need to keep in mind is the search skills required to find things in your new genrefied system needs to be transferable to using the Dewey Decimal System or Library of Congress, because kids are not just going to be checking out books in your school library. They're going to go to the public library and eventually possibly to an academic library in a college. And that was something that we ran into in the district where we had genrefied nonfiction. I inherited that collection. But when I met with the high school librarians, the high school we fed into, they were very, very clear that the kids coming from our district were really struggling with being able to find materials in a Dewey Decimal organized library. So these are just, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying this is something you really need to consider carefully if you're thinking about. Now we're going to talk a little bit about library software. In the Rails service area, the 3 most commonly used library software in school libraries is number 1 is Destiny, 2 is Alexandria, and 3 is Atrium. I went to Capterra to get a comparison because I like that site. You can compare all sorts of tech stuff. So I compared the three. And out of a perfect score of 5, this is how they broke it down. Your ease of use, customer service, features, and percentage likely to recommend. Now, ironically, for the majority of people using Destiny, it has the lowest recommendation rate. I think this is probably because 1, it's the most expensive of the 3. And 2, I see on the IL listserv frequently, is Follett down? Is your Follett working? I mean, this is a regular thread. You've all seen it. And I think that that's the problem. I've used all 3 of these, and I will say Follett's tech service is not the most readily available. You often wait longer period of time with Follett than you do the others. The next one is Alexandria, and their scores are a little bit better. This one was the percentage of users likely to recommend was the highest. I would say it's probably because it has the most attractive interface of the 3. It used to be much more affordable. I recently priced it, and it's right underneath Follett, so it's become very pricey. It has some cool features. One thing is it's very intuitive, more so than the other 2. When I use this, my district would not pay for any training, so I had to figure it out on my own. And I figured it out on my own. I don't think I missed any feature in it. It is very easy to use right out of the box. And then there's Atrium. Atrium kind of falls in the middle. It's a little bit considered higher in ease of use and features. Some things about Atrium that are really helpful are you can set up the OPAC to meet different seasons and holidays and stuff, which is a cool feature, and the kids seem to like that. You can set up the background on the back end that you see. So I had mine in my favorite color, why not? You can also create your own reports. This is kind of a blessing and a curse because it's all done through sorts, which means you have to go, I want this, but not this, and this, but not this. And it's all of these things that you have to indicate that you want in it before it creates a report. It's a little cumbersome, but once you've got one, you can save them and they're there. It is handy to be able to do that. Now, if you are unautomated or, you're looking for another option or something more affordable, these are all software options that are out there that cost $1,000 a year or less. I have not used any of them. I have looked into LibBib. I'm on my local area school board, and we were talking about library software. And LibBib has an option that I believe is, it's under 1,000. It might even be like $100 a year. It's very affordable. The drawback I know on that one is if you use the unpaid one, you don't have an OPAC. You can get it for free, but you have no OPAC and you're limited to how many books you can put in it. If you do the purchased one, you can put up to 50,000 items in it, which is, I don't know too many school libraries that are going to exceed that. You have an OPAC, but you can't run inventory. So what I would suggest if you're looking at something that's lower cost and you're not automated and you'd like something, is just go to their sites, talk to their representatives, and a lot of them will give you free demos and just kind of see what will work for you, what will work for your library. If there's concessions to be made, are there things that you can live with? And that brings me to the end of what I had. Does anybody have any questions? And the way I have this set up, I can't see the chat. So Dan, you're gonna have to help me out here.
This is great, Barb. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so just for you all's sake, I want to note that Barb squeezed about 2 semesters worth of information into a half-an-hour presentation. I mean, a lot of our presenters have done that today. But there's a lot of questions out there. Folks are asking, how much does it cost? How much time does it take to change? A lot of these things really, really depend. They depend on your school. They depend on your collection. There's no one size fits all solution. There's no best. There's no nothing like that. So there's some great questions. Barb, would you stop sharing your screen
yes, so I can actually, yeah.
That's and then folks can raise their hand if you have questions. We'll
try to. Yes.
We'll We'll try to get to all of them, but I have a feeling there's probably going to be more. And Barb did provide her email address in the chat, and you can certainly get in touch with her or the folks at Illinois Heartland Library System as well, because they'll have a lot of great answers for you too. Okay, I'm going to ask one that came from the chat, Barb.
Okay.
I think this is a great one, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure the person's going to love the answer. But how easy is it to transfer from one system to another?
If you already have MARC records and you're in an automated system, it's not as bad as you'd think it is, because I've done it. You basically have to work with the new vendor and just find out, you know, how they want the upload done. Sometimes it's a really easy process, and other times it's a little more cumbersome. It just depends. I would get your IT department in on this for sure. I don't, you know, it depends on if you're cloud-based or if you're actually based on your server. There's a lot of variables, but as long as you have actual electronic MARC records, the transfer to another system with electronic MARC records is not as bad as when you're doing it entirely on paper and you're trying to go electronic. That's way more complicated.
Yeah, thank you, Barb. I appreciate that. Sarah, you have your hand raised, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So we're trying to build our library from the ground up, basically, and I find cataloging daunting only because I really don't know where to start. Do I need to open up like a spreadsheet and then type in the author, the title, the ISBN, the summary, like do all of that? Or does that need to be done in one of the software systems you were just talking about? And then choose
okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
or Library of Congress. I'm trying not to cry. It's going to be fine, but we're really trying to build library from the ground up that hasn't been used in over 20 years from a really small 300 school or student school district.
I've been there. I inherited a library that was, whoops, let me turn this down a bit. I'm sorry, I'm echoing back. I inherited, none of the books had ever been cataloged. They had no spine labels, and they just threw them in boxes in the middle of the room. I'm 5 feet tall, and the boxes were the tower was taller than me. So I've been there. It's like, oh, great. Now what do I do? I would strongly recommend that you figure out who you're going to use as your software first, because they will tell you specifically what they want in an Excel sheet, or you can do it in Google, you know, it doesn't matter, some type of, sheet format. And generally what they will be looking for is the ISBN. That's the first thing they're going to try to match the book by. And then the title, the author, and probably the copyright date. Now, you may have some really old picture books that are in good condition and worth having, but they're so old they don't have an ISBN. It'll be a Library of Congress number. You can still use that. Most vendors can match it that way. That's the basics that they look for, but I would find a vendor first and find out what they want. There is also, now being a small district, probably out of your reach, there are several third-party vendors that you can hire, and it's anywhere from 5 to 15 cents a book, and they will create MARC records for you. But like I said, that can get very expensive depending on the size of the collection. I would also recommend weed before you, put all this stuff in a spreadsheet for, a vendor. Once you found a vendor, is weed the collection, because there's probably gonna be a lot of things there you don't want to keep. So really only focus on, start with the weeding, find a vendor, find out, what criteria they want in the spreadsheet, and take it from there. I was able to get a library weeded and automated. I will be honest, it took me more than one whole school year. I don't think we were fully automated till the following fall, but I was able to do checkout on an Excel spreadsheet for most of the first school year.
Yeah, Sarah, I just want to say that you're not alone out there. There are plenty of people who are in situations, we call them, a lot of times we call them unautomated libraries, right? Or not, or lower automated libraries, where you just, it's you don't have a catalog, right? And you're working to sort of do those things. You know, and I'll say this, I'm sure that my colleague Leah Gregory from Illinois Heartland would say the same thing, is, you know, we see this a lot. We encounter public libraries that are not automated sometimes. So it's you know, you're not alone. Please take advantage of the resources out there and the folks out there who can help you, including Barb and others. So Nancy, I saw your hand up. I think that's maybe the last question that we have time for before we get to the next presentation.
Okay, I have weeded, and I have she genrefied my fiction. I want to put it back into alphabetical order, but sticker it, color code it by genre. Is there a place I can scan an ISBN and find out what genre the book is?
Usually, like I said, I've just defaulted. I went to Follett, their website, because they do list the genres. They're one that I know does, and I just took it that way because I figured then at least it's consistent, because I'm just going with the same place all the way through, whether I bought the book there or not.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I did see, I'm going to steal another minute here, Dan.
Yeah,
I saw in the chat people asking about weeded stuff. If you are in the western suburbs, you can contact Scarce, which is in DuPage County. If you are in the south suburbs, Dan, do you remember what the name of the place is in Blue Island?
ACI.
Thank you. They will take them, and they just basically, as I remember right, they cut the spines off, take the covers off, and they pulp the pages, and they pay you for them. It's not a lot, but hey, you get something if you bring them to them. If they have to come and collect them, I don't think that they pay you, but I kind of didn't care. I just didn't want them in landfill. There are a few other places, if you go online and start looking, that will either recycle them, repurpose them. You know, there's any number of things. I've also turn them into book art. I have had the librarian turn them into book art. You can see if the better conditioned ones, if your local friends of the library and your public library wants them. So there are some avenues for disposing of no longer wanted materials.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Barb. And, you know, for those of you that are looking for resources on how to do weeding, I invite, I'm sure that some folks here, especially the people that talked about material selection today, would probably give you some great advice on how to, you know, not just build your collection, but also keep your collection fresh. So, Barb, you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.